So I'm here because I believe astronomy can save the world. Now, I grew up in rural North Texas. We lived just far enough outside the nearest city that you could still see stars. There wasn't enough light pollution, at least during my childhood. You could still see stars. And I have so many memories of going outside to give my family's dogs their dinner, and I'd just stay and kind of like lean back against the roof of the doghouse. It was at just the right pitch that I could look up and just watch the stars. And I could do that for hours and never get bored. I just loved space so much. And so, even though I loved astronomy, I didn't know that astronomer was a job title that I could actually have for many years. I was homeschooled my entire life, and neither of my parents went to college. My dad, in fact, didn't finish high school. Around when I was 12 or 14, any semblance of anything I had resembling formal education, well, that kind of ended. I got far enough into algebra that my mom couldn't teach me anymore. I was reading at a college level by then, and so, without any directions or any constraints, I spent all of my time reading every book, every magazine I could get my hand on to learn about whatever I wanted to learn. And most of the time, what I wanted to learn about was astronomy. Exoplanets, planets outside our solar system, they still are, and they've always been my favorite thing. I've always loved imagining what worlds and what life might exist beyond our solar system. Now, it wasn't until I was about 16 or so that I realized astronomy was a thing, a job that one could have. And I remember that night that I realized it. I was watching the Science Channel as I did, and I was watching a documentary, and one of the astronomers that I'd come to recognize, I'm pretty sure it was Dr. Michelle Thaller, who just recently retired from NASA. I remember she spoke, and I remember having this revelation. What if I couldn't just learn astronomy? What if I could be an astronomer? Now, the sense of absolute certainty that came with that revelation was really jarring for a teen who often struggled to make decisions. Now, I knew that to be an astronomer meant I had to go to college, and I knew college was something like grad school, not grad school, grade school, except more advanced. But I had no real sense of what grade school was either, since I'd been homeschooled my whole life. And so I remember being terrified, questioning whether I was smart enough or strong enough to pursue an education. I told my family that I wanted to go to college to study astronomy, and it soon became clear that I was never going to get the information I needed from them to be able to apply for the financial aid I needed to cover tuition as a working class student. I was on my own. Now, life could be kind of difficult growing up for me, and I spent a lot of time outside, during the day with the Texas wildflowers, and during the night with the stars. And if I wasn't outside, well, I was probably inside reading a book or watching the Science Channel. One night, the original Cosmos series happened to air during a really dark period in my personal life. I, of course, watched it because, it was on the Science Channel, it was space, of course I was going to watch it. Now, this was the late 2000s, so Carl Sagan was long gone by then, but across time, his words reached me when I needed them. And I learned what I've come to think of as the stardust talk. The stardust talk goes something like this. In the beginning, when the universe first came into existence, there was nothing there except for the simplest chemical elements, hydrogen, and like a smattering of helium. But that was about it. You may know hydrogen for its place in water, H2O, the H is for hydrogen, but the O is for oxygen. We breathe that. But oxygen didn't exist yet when the universe first began. In fact, none of the heavy elements that life needs, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, all the heavier elements than hydrogen, they didn't exist yet. So there was no life when the universe first began because none of the elements that life needs were present yet. Now, over eons, all of this hydrogen in the early universe, it kind of condensed into these unimaginably huge clouds. that then coalesced into those first stars in our universe. Now, the way stars work, they're basically nuclear reactors with good PR. So, I know. So, in the core of a star, what's going on is, to fuel their existence, stars fuse hydrogen into helium inside of their cores. And they do this for a while, but at some point, a star runs out of hydrogen in its core. Can't fuse it anymore. Well, when that happens, a star starts fusing the helium in its core into carbon. But you might already be thinking, well, what happens when it runs out of helium? Well, then it starts fusing carbon and so on, up through heavier and heavier elements. Until at last, the star doesn't have enough energy to fuse anything heavier than iron. And then it dies. So the universe's first stars died when they ran out of hydrogen in their cores and had fused all that they could into these heavier elements, the carbon, the oxygen, the iron. When stars die, they explode. And they send all of their material out into the cosmos, just whooshing out. And so, there's still plenty of hydrogen in the universe. So as all of this material, all of these ashes of the previous stars, so to speak, when all of this material mixed with new clouds of hydrogen that formed new stars, now for the first time you can have planets forming around these stars made out of the carbon, the iron, all the heavier elements. And so, for at least one star in our galaxy, one planet formed that harbors life. Ours. We're made mostly of carbon. Our bones, they're made of calcium. We breathe oxygen and nitrogen also. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. Our blood is red because it's made of iron. Not a single one of these elements existed until a star created them, until the universe's first stars created them. We exist because we're made from the ashes of dead stars. I'd like to look around a bit. Look at the people next to you. Everything you can see, everything you can touch, everyone you know, we ourselves, we're all made of stardust. When you look down at your hands, you're looking at stardust. How does this change you? When I understood this, it changed everything for me. Not following through on my dream of becoming an astronomer, not doing it, well, that was no longer an option. I had to do it no matter what it took. I could not keep this beautiful universe away from me. I had to be part of it, and I had to learn. The day after my 19th birthday, I started my first class at the local community college. It was the only place that I could afford, with my parents' financial stability having been wiped out by the 2008 recession a few years ago. And it was also the only place that I knew would take a chance on someone with absolutely zero pre-college record. I didn't take the SAT or the ACT because, well, they cost money that I didn't have. So I just took the community college's entrance exam. And I placed into remedial algebra. And I entered the classroom believing that I was too stupid to be a scientist, let alone not just studying science, but to pursue a career as a scientist. But it didn't take long for that belief to disappear. Because for the first time, I was in the presence of teachers who saw not just my disadvantages, but teachers who saw me and showed me how to shine with a light that I didn't know I had. I quickly became the top student in just about every class I took because it turned out that I could flourish in an environment that nourished me. Life at the community college was transformative. No matter how unbearable life could be outside, once I walked through the doors of the community college, I was free. There's an important corollary to the stardust talk that I learned when I got to take my first science classes at the community college. So, everything in our solar system, our whole solar system, was made from the same cloud of stardust. So everything on Earth came from the same cloud of stardust. And everything, every living thing, especially on Earth, has been recycling the same atoms over and over and over again for millennia, starting all the way back with the very first molecule of DNA that led to the evolution of everything else that lives. And so because we all share this common source, this common starting point of DNA, we all have, by us, I mean every species has some DNA in common. And you can get a vague sense for how closely related different species are by how much DNA they have in common. So chimpanzees, for example, we're pretty closely related to. We share like 96% of our DNA with them. But what about humans? Like unrelated humans, humans who are not related to each other. How much DNA do we share? Well, it turns out unrelated humans share so much DNA, more than 99.9%, that we are 99.9%, more than 99.9% exactly the same. We are all so closely related, even though there's so many different and beautiful ways of being human, at the same time, we're all so closely related that in a very literal sense, we are each other's family. And even if we find life out in the universe somewhere, we won't find humans. That's it. Like, we're all we have. It's just us. We're more closely related to each other than we are to any other creature anywhere in the entire universe. We're literally each other's family. As I got near the end of my time at community college, I was devastated by a series of personal tragedies. All within the same 6-month span, my beloved academic mentor, my English professor, she was killed in a car accident. My grandmother died suddenly of an aggressive cancer that came out of nowhere. And my dad was diagnosed with cancer days before my 21st birthday. Amidst my grief, I had to learn how to run a household, how to help my parents run the household while I was still in school. And our financial situation had already been dire, and now while what money had been saved over the years for me to go to college was just gone, all at once. And I didn't know how I was going to get through it. I remember looking at my hands in many moments of despair and seeing in them the stardust that we're all made out of. And having the thought that I and everyone I had loved had had a chance to live because stars had died. And I didn't know what it meant that I'm here, but it meant something. It meant something. And that one thought gave me the strength to keep going in the face of soul-crushing grief and impossible obstacles. And so, the only way I could finish my education was to pay my own way, and so that's what I did. Now, when you go to a community college, a typical path people take is you take 2 or 3 years to get your associate's degree, and then you transfer to a 4-year school, like Meredith, for instance. You transfer to a 4-year school to get your bachelor's degree. Now, when I applied for transfer admission, I thankfully received several very generous scholarships, but I couldn't apply for need-based financial aid still. I could not, because I couldn't get the info I needed. And the scholarships that I received, they didn't add up to a full ride. So I had to make the difficult decision to defer my transfer admission for a year so I could keep my job as a student worker working in the community college library for another year to save up enough money to put toward tuition that the scholarships didn't cover. When I did finally transfer, it still was a little rough. When I did finally transfer, I commuted 40 minutes one way every single day from my parents' house to avoid paying for a dorm that I couldn't afford. I was working 2 jobs. By the end, I was working 3 jobs and taking the minimum full-time course load that I could so that I could work enough hours to pay for what the scholarships didn't cover. I remember so many weeks on end drinking way too much coffee and sleeping like 3 hours a night just to get my work done. And even then, the whole thing had to be carefully choreographed. I remember calculating that I would run out of money I had saved from working the semester right before I turned 24 and could finally apply for financial aid as an independent adult, so I could get the financial aid I needed to actually finish my degree. I remember crying so many tears of relief and gratitude when I got that letter in my email inbox that finally confirmed that I didn't have to drop out of school. I was going to make it. Now, it wasn't until I transferred to an institution that didn't have many students like me that I realized my background made me weird. So I was working class, homeschooled my whole life, like I mentioned, and after transferring, I discovered that no matter what I accomplished, no matter what I did, I still have to fight sexism and classism just to get where I needed to go. But even in spite of those obstacles, even in spite of the barriers I faced, I got to do research. I got to study stars. I got to do research in astronomy. And I got to go present it at conferences because of teachers, because of professors, and because of my dearest, closest friends who saw me, who believed in me, and who gave me strength to keep going. It took me a total of 7 years to get my bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, in physics with minors in math and chemistry. If it took every hardship and every year to get where I am now here, I'd do it all again. Sometimes I look around in disbelief that this is my life now. I mean, I'm still that young girl in rural North Texas who used to retreat to her backyard and look up at the stars and feel comforted by how small they made her feel. I'm still that first-generation student who, even though she was terrified, found strength because of her friends, because of her professors, because of people who cared for her, and found her wings through the liberation of education. And now I'm an astronomer and an educator. But more than any of that, more importantly than any of that, I am stardust. You, all of you, are stardust. And we're all each other's family. I wonder how different life could be if everyone everywhere looked at our world, each other, ourselves, and saw stardust. I believe astronomy can save the world because astronomy saved me. Thank you.